The black janitor was insulted by the billionaire CEO. Then a tattoo revealed his true identity. And what happened next? No one could have predicted. Do you really think you're going to clean this mess with those dirty hands? Victoria Sterling's sharp voice echoed through the marble lobby of Sterling Dynamics, causing all the executives to stop and watch the scene. The billionaire CEO pointed contemptuously at David Johnson, who was kneeling on the floor, polishing a stain on the shiny floor. David was 38 years old and never imagined that a simple job as a janitor would become the stage for one of the greatest humiliations of his life. He looked up calmly, showing no anger or embarrassment, just the disturbing serenity of someone who has faced much worse situations. Perhaps we should hire someone more suitable to work in a corporate environment of this level. Victoria continued, adjusting her Armani blazer as her Louboutin heels clicked impatiently on the marble. People like you should know their place. The executive's discreet laughter filled the awkward silence. David simply nodded, put away his cleaning supplies, and stood up with a dignity that made Victoria frown, annoyed that she had failed to break his spirit. In the last months working there, David had noticed the looks of superiority, the whispered comments, the way Victoria always found fault with his work when other executives were around, as if she constantly needed to prove her authority by humiliating those she considered inferior. What Victoria Sterling didn't know was that David Johnson wasn't just a janitor, and what she could never have imagined was that the discreet tattoo he kept hidden under the sleeve of his uniform shirt carried a story that would turn that public humiliation into the biggest mistake of her life. As he walked toward the supply closet, David allowed himself an almost imperceptible smile. Some secrets are too powerful to be revealed before the right time, and Victoria Sterling was about to discover that underestimating people can be a very costly mistake. If you've ever felt humiliated by someone who abused their position of power, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a billionaire CEO's arrogance turned into her own downfall in a way that no one would ever forget. In the days following the public humiliation, Victoria Sterling seemed determined to make David's life even more miserable. It was as if that display of power in front of the executives had awakened in her a sadistic pleasure in crushing those she considered inferior. "Johnson, did you lose something?" The sharp voice echoed through the executive parking lot the next morning. David was picking up some papers that had flown out of the garbage truck when Victoria stepped out of her silver Mercedes-Benz AMG. "Maybe your dignity, because from what I can see, you lost that a long time ago." The other employees passing by lowered their heads, pretending not to hear. David simply continued picking up the papers, his calmness irritating Victoria even more. "Do you know what your problem is?" she continued, approaching him with that cruel smile she had perfected in boardrooms. "You don't understand hierarchy. You don't understand that there are people who are born to lead and others who are born to clean." David slowly stood up, held the trash bag with one hand, and for the first time looked Victoria directly in the eye. "You're right," he said calmly. "Some people are indeed born with different purposes." Something in his tone made Victoria hesitate for a split second. There was a depth in that gaze she couldn't decipher, as if he were seeing through her in a way that deeply disturbed her. "Get out of my sight," she ordered, masking her discomfort with more aggression. That same afternoon, Victoria called a meeting with the Human Resources Department. "I want a complete audit of all cleaning staff," she announced coldly, especially David Johnson. "Background checks, references, criminal history, everything." Janet Murphy, director of HR for 15 years, frowned. "Ms. Sterling, Mr. Johnson went through all the standard procedures when he was hired. His references are impeccable, and he has an honorable military record." "Military," Victoria interrupted, a spark of interest in her eyes. "What kind of military service?" "Air Force, ma'am, decorated veteran. Actually, he was discharged due to combat injuries." Victoria smiled dismissively. "Probably some desk job. Anyway, I want all his paperwork on my desk by tomorrow." What Victoria didn't know was that at that very moment, David was at home helping his 12-year-old daughter Zoe with her math homework. The girl had inherited her father's sharp intelligence and ability to remain calm under pressure. "Dad," Zoe said, looking up from her books. "Mrs. Anderson said you were a war hero, is that true?" David paused, his hand unconsciously touching his left arm, where beneath his shirt sleeve rested a tattoo that few people in the world had seen. "Why do you ask, Princess?" "Because I told her that my dad was the bravest man I knew. And she said, that was silly because you're just a janitor." David's jaw twitched almost imperceptibly. "And what did you say?" Zoe smiled, that determined smile she had inherited from her father. "I said she had no idea what she was talking about, that some people are heroes, not because everyone knows it, but because they choose to protect others even when noon is looking." David felt immense pride in his daughter, but also controlled anger when he realized how prejudice was affecting even a 12-year-old child. It was at that moment that he made a decision that would change everything. That night, after Zoe went to bed, David opened a locked chest at the back of the closet. Inside were medals, certificates of honor, photographs from a time when he wore a very different uniform, and a special phone he hadn't used in years. He dialed a number he knew by heart. Even after all this time, "Marcus, it's me. David, I need a favor." The voice on the other end of the line was warm but surprised. "David Johnson, after all these years, what do you need, brother?" "Information about Sterling Dynamics. And maybe it's time some people found out who I really am." Each new humiliation from Victoria was fueling a strength within him that she couldn't see. The quiet determination of a man who had faced much worse situations and emerged victorious. What that arrogant CEO didn't know was that she was messing with someone who had been trained to turn apparent disadvantages into devastating strategic victories. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a name in David's address book. He was the only investigative journalist who had managed to expose 3 major corporate scandals in the last 5 years, bringing down CEOs who seemed untouchable. More importantly, he was the only man David had trusted completely since his days in the military. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked over the phone the next morning, his voice heavy with concern. "Victoria Sterling isn't just an arrogant CEO. David, the family has tentacles in Washington, billion-dollar military contracts, and a reputation for crushing anyone who threatens their interests." David watched from the apartment window. Zoe got ready for school. "That's exactly why I need to do this right. She's not just humiliating me, Marcus. She's teaching my daughter that there are superior and inferior people in this world, and that's not going to continue. All right, send me everything you can get on the company. Contracts, disgruntled employees, anything suspicious." But David Marcus paused significantly. "If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Sterling Dynamics has a history of covering up harassment lawsuits, several layoffs for cost-cutting that coincidentally affected Black and Latino employees. Victoria may be new in charge, but she's already shown that she's just as ruthless as her father." Meanwhile, in the executive offices of Sterling Dynamics, Victoria meticulously examined the dossier on David that Janet had delivered. Her eyebrows furrowed with each page she turned. Air Force for 10 years. Medal of Honor, classified missions, she muttered to herself. Discharge due to combat injuries for armament. Something resembling discomfort flitted across her face, but it was quickly replaced by irritation. "It doesn't matter what he was," she said aloud, as if trying to convince herself. "Now he's just a janitor who needs to learn his place." That afternoon, Victoria summoned David for a private conversation in her office. The pretext was a supposed complaint about the cleanliness of the executive bathroom, but the real intention was obvious. "More humiliation. Sit down," she ordered, pointing to a low chair strategically positioned in front of her elevated desk. "I've received some concerns about the quality of your work." David remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture Victoria did not recognize as military. "What kind of concerns, ma'am?" "The kind that question whether you are truly qualified to work in an environment such as this," she replied, her tone dripping with condescension. "Perhaps it is time to consider opportunities at establishments more suited to your profile." "I see," David nodded calmly. "May I ask what specific aspect of my work is substandard?" Victoria hesitated. In truth, David's work was impeccable, better than any other cleaning staff they had ever hired. "It's a matter of cultural fit." "Cultural fit," David repeated the words slowly, as if savoring their true meaning. Interesting expression. Something in his tone made Victoria feel uneasy, but she masked it with more aggression. "I don't like your tone. Perhaps you should start looking for another job?" "I'll consider your suggestion," David replied, heading for the door. Then he stopped and turned around. "Ms. Sterling, may I ask you a personal question?" "What?" Victoria asked, surprised by his audacity. "Have you ever served your country in any way?" The question hit Victoria like a slap in the face. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Just curious." David smiled slightly, that same smile that had irritated Victoria from day one. "Have a good afternoon, ma'am." After he left, Victoria stood alone in her office, feeling strangely diminished. There was something about his question, the way he asked it, that stirred an uncomfortable feeling that she was losing a game whose rules she didn't know. That evening, David sat at his kitchen table with a borrowed notebook and began doing something he hadn't done in years. Tactical intelligence research. Every Sterling Dynamics government contract, every labor lawsuit filed, every newspaper article about the Sterling family. "Dad, what are you doing?" Zoe asked, approaching curiously. "Homework?" David replied, gently closing the laptop. "Sometimes adults need to study too. Is it about that mean woman at your job?" David looked at his daughter, impressed by her insight. Why do you say that? Because you have that look you used to have when the boys at school teased me, like you're planning something. David chuckled softly. And what did I used to do with the boys at school? You didn't fight with them. You talked to their parents, and then they stopped bothering me and started respecting me. Zoe smiled. Are you going to talk to her parents? Something like that, princess. Something like that. The next morning, Marcus called with information that made David smile for the first time in weeks. You won't believe what I found in the Pentagon archives, Marcus said, his voice vibrating with excitement. Sterling Dynamics has a $2.8 billion contract to supply aeronautical components for F-35 fighter jets. The contract is subject to annual renewal based on security assessments and cultural fit. Go on, David said, feeling the first taste of justice. Even more interesting, there's an internal investigation being conducted by the Department of Defense into discriminatory practices at contractors. They're specifically looking for evidence of discrimination against veterans. David closed his eyes, visualizing the strategy forming in his mind like a tactical map. Marcus, I need you to document everything that has happened to me in the last 3 months. Every humiliation, every comment, and I need a special favor, anything. I need you to find out who else Victoria Sterling has humiliated in this way. And I need their stories, as David ended the call. He didn't know that 3 floors above, Victoria Sterling was about to make the mistake that would seal her fate. She had decided to make the lesson for David even more public and humiliating. What she didn't know was that every cruel move she made from that moment on was being carefully documented by someone who had learned to turn the arrogance of his enemies into their own defeat. Someone who knew the true meaning of strategy, patience, and justice. And for the first time since he started working at Sterling Dynamics, David Johnson unconsciously touched the tattoo on his arm, feeling the weight of the story that was about to be revealed. David Johnson's revenge began the following Monday. But Victoria Sterling didn't realize she was being hunted until Thursday when it was too late to escape. It all started when Marcus Thompson published a seemingly routine article in the Washington Post titled Systematic Discrimination in Defense Companies, a Growing Problem. The article did not mention Sterling Dynamics directly, but it cited troubling practices at major Pentagon contractors and included a devastating statistic. Companies with a history of discrimination against veterans were losing contract renewals at an accelerated rate. Victoria read the article over breakfast and dismissed it as just another irrelevant piece of political correctness. There was no way of knowing that Marcus had sent confidential copies to 3 specific colonels at the Pentagon, all veterans who knew David Johnson's true story personally. On Tuesday, Victoria summoned David to her office for the last time. She was determined to fire him in a humiliating manner in front of the entire executive team. Johnson, your presence in this company is no longer appropriate, she announced coldly with 5 vice presidents watching the scene. Consider this your last day. David remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, and for the first time smiled genuinely at Victoria. May I ask a question before I leave, Miss Sterling? Be quick. Do you know the meaning of the bronze star with V device? Victoria frowned. What does that have to do with anything? Simple curiosity, David replied slowly, beginning to roll up his left sleeve. I was just wondering if you would recognize a war hero, even if he were standing right in front of you. The revealed tattoo instantly made the air in the room heavy. It wasn't just a decorative tattoo. It was the wings of an elite Air Force pilot accompanied by specific GPS coordinates and a date, April 15th, 2019. Below in small but legible letters, Operation Phoenix Successful Rescue. Vice President of Operations Thompson, who had served in the Navy, paled. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Those are the coordinates of the rescue mission that saved 17 American soldiers in Afghanistan, David calmly added, including a young Air Force second lieutenant named Robert Sterling, son of the founder of this company. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Her younger brother, Robert, had died in a car accident 3 years after returning from Afghanistan, but she remembered perfectly the stories he told about a pilot who had saved his life. No, she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time in years. Captain David Johnson, 347th Special Operations Squadron. He introduced himself formally. I received the Bronze Star with V device for successfully extracting 17 American service members from hostile territory after the primary mission was compromised. One of those soldiers was your brother, Ms. Sterling, on Wednesday. While Victoria was trying to process the devastating revelation, Marcus activated the second phase of the plan. 3 former Sterling Dynamics employees appeared simultaneously on local radio shows, each telling detailed stories of racial discrimination and bullying under Victoria's leadership. But the coup de grace came on Thursday morning. Victoria arrived at the office to find a CNN news van parked in front of the building. Her assistant was waiting for her at the door, his face ashen. "Ms. Sterling, the Pentagon just announced an emergency audit of all our contracts," he stammered. "And there's a reporter here wanting to talk to you about Captain Johnson." Marcus Thompson stood in the lobby with a smile that made Victoria's blood run cold. "Miss Sterling, thank you for seeing me. I believe you know David Johnson." David stood beside Marcus wearing something other than his janitor's uniform for the first time in months. The simple dress shirt and dark slacks transformed him completely, or rather revealed who he'd always been beneath the disguise Victoria had forced upon him. "Would you care to comment on the allegations that you systematically humiliated and discriminated against a decorated veteran, specifically the man who saved your late brother's life?" Marcus asked, discreetly turning on a tape recorder. Victoria tried to speak, but the words refused to come out. She looked around and realized that the entire lobby had stopped to watch. Employees, customers, suppliers, all witnessing her public humiliation. I didn't know," she finally managed to whisper. "Didn't know what?" David asked calmly. "That I was a veteran. It was clearly listed on my hiring file. Or didn't you know that publicly humiliating people for their skin color and social class was wrong?" The question hit Victoria like a punch in the stomach, because the terrible truth was that she really didn't know. Or rather, she had chosen not to know. She had seen only what she wanted to see, a black janitor she could use to demonstrate her supposed superiority. "Captain Johnson," Marcus said, "would you mind showing Miss Sterling what the Pentagon sent this morning?" David pulled an official envelope from his pocket. A letter of recommendation signed by General Morrison requesting a formal investigation into discriminatory practices at Sterling Dynamics. Apparently, discriminating against decorated veterans is considered a serious violation of the terms of defense contracts. Victoria read the document with trembling hands. The words danced before her eyes: immediate audit, temporary suspension of all contracts, investigation for racial discrimination, possible permanent loss of qualification for government contracts. 2.8 billion, David said softly. "That's how much your company will lose in government contracts when this investigation is complete." Interesting how a simple act of basic respect could have prevented all of this. Victoria looked around desperately, searching for support, understanding, anything. But she found only looks of shock, disappointment, and in some cases, disgust. Her own employees stared at her, as if they were seeing a monster for the first time. "Please," she whispered. Her voice breaking. "I can fix this, can what?" David interrupted gently. "Restore the dignity you tried to take from me in front of my daughter. Under the months of humiliation my family had to endure. Resurrect your brother, so he can see how you treat the people who risk their lives to save him." Tears began to roll down Victoria's face. The first genuine tears she had shed since her father's funeral. "He talked about you," she admitted between sobs. Roberto Ways talked about the pilot who saved him. "He said you were the bravest man he ever knew. And you decided that this man should spend the rest of his life cleaning the floor with his shoes," David replied, his voice still calm but now laden with deep sadness. "Not because of anything I had done wrong, but simply because you believed that my skin color made me less than you." The CNN camera captured every second of Victoria Sterling's collapse. The woman who had spent months displaying cruel superiority was now on her knees in the middle of her own company's lobby, sobbing uncontrollably. Marcus turned off the recorder. "The story will be published tomorrow," he announced, with full statements from 14 employees who witnessed systematic discrimination in this company. David crouched down until he was at Victoria's eye level. "Miss Sterling, I'm going to tell you something I learned in the Army. True leadership doesn't come from making people feel small. It comes from lifting them up. Your brother understood that. It's a shame you chose a different path." He stood up and headed for the exit, but paused at the door. "Oh, and just so you know, I didn't do this out of revenge. I did it because my 12-year-old daughter is learning that in this world there are consequences for our choices, and he wanted to make sure she learned that Noon, no matter how rich or powerful, has the right to humiliate another human being." As David and Marcus left the building, Victoria remained on the cold marble floor, surrounded by shocked employees and embarrassed customers. In a single morning, she had lost not only billions in contracts, but also any respect she might have had as a leader. Worst of all was the gradual realization that David Johnson had never been her victim. From day one, he had been the patient predator, allowing her to die her own grave with every cruel and discriminatory act. For 3 months, she thought she was demonstrating superiority over a helpless janitor. In reality, she was being carefully evaluated, and judged by a war hero who developed his strategy with precision and patience that had saved 17 lives in enemy territory. And as the cameras captured her utter humiliation, Victoria Sterling finally understood Allison that had come too late. True strength never needs to humiliate others to prove its worth. But when that strength is underestimated and provoked long enough, its response is as devastating as it is precise. 6 months later, David Johnson sat in a conference room at the Pentagon wearing the civilian consultant uniform he hadn't worn in years. Before him, 3 generals listened intently to his recommendations on anti-discrimination policies for government contractors. Based on the Sterling Dynamics case, David said, pointing to a chart in the presentation, we implemented an audit system that identified discriminatory practices in 23% of contracted companies. The result was a savings of $2.1 billion in contracts redirected to truly inclusive companies. General Morrison smiled. Captain Johnson, in 6 months, you have revolutionized our hiring policies. Companies that previously discriminated against veterans are now competing to hire military veterans. Meanwhile, on the other side of Washington, Victoria Sterling was signing the final bankruptcy documents for Sterling Dynamics. The company her family had built over 3 generations had completely collapsed. The canceled government contracts created a domino effect that destroyed relationships with private suppliers and international investors. Mrs. Sterling said to the bankruptcy lawyer, with the accumulated debts and labor lawsuits, your personal assets will also be affected. The apartment on Park Avenue, the house in the Hamptons. Victoria nodded silently. In recent months, she had lost not only the company, but all of her social circles. Former friends avoided her. Charitable organizations canceled her participation in events, and even the exclusive country club where she grew up had politely suggested that she consider her membership. Marcus Thompson published a 7-part investigative series on the case, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Investigative Journalism. The series not only exposed systematic discrimination at Sterling Dynamics, but inspired similar investigations at other corporations, creating a national wave of hiring policy reforms. David had declined all interview offers after the initial expose. I didn't seek publicity, he explained to Marcus. I sought justice, and true justice doesn't need the spotlight. On a sunny afternoon, David came home to find Zoe in the kitchen doing her homework. She was now attending a private school on a full scholarship, one of the many opportunities that had come her way after her story became public. Dad, Zoe said. Looking up from her books, my teacher said, "You're famous now, David Loft." Sitting down next to her. "And what did you say?" "That you've always been a hero, only now other people have discovered it too." She paused. "Dad, do you still hate that mean woman?" David considered the question carefully. "No, sweetheart. Hate is too heavy a burden to carry. I just showed her that actions have consequences. Like karma with a little help," David smiled. 3 months later, Victoria Sterling was seen working as a receptionist at a small accounting firm in Queens. Her former subordinates, now working at more respectable companies, occasionally recognized her on the street. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others simply ignored her. David, meanwhile, had been promoted to National Director of Inclusion and Diversity for defense contracts, the first position of its kind created by the Pentagon. His work not only protected thousands of veterans from future discrimination, but set legal precedents that transformed American corporate culture. David's real victory was not the downfall of Victoria Sterling, but the rise of people like him. Hundreds of veterans, especially those from minority groups, found opportunities that had previously been denied to them. Companies discovered that true inclusion was not only morally right, but also extremely profitable. One night, as he was putting Zoe to bed, she asked one last question. "Daddy, if that woman apologized now, would you forgive her?" David thought of the tattoo on his arm, the coordinates of a mission where he saved 17 lives, including Victoria's brother, Princess. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting anger control our decisions. Victoria Sterling tried to destroy a man she deemed inferior, but ended up destroying herself. David learned that true revenge is not retaliating for the harm done to you. It is achieving success your enemies could never imagine and using that success to protect others who cannot protect themselves. If you have faced discrimination or injustice, subscribe to the channel.